Welcome everyone across the planet to Connecting Dots, a laser-focused quick-fire interview on food and the economy with international experts where we seek answers to questions all of us should be asking. I'm Ajay Jakar, Chairman, Bharat Krishik Samaj of Farmers Forum India, as well as Vice Chair of Action Track 2, Shift to Sustainable Consumption Patterns at the UN Food Systems Summit. Today, I interview Joao Campari, the global leader, food practice at World Wildlife Fund International and chair of Action Track 3 at the UN Food Systems Summit, where we discuss perks of regenerative agriculture, understand the shortcomings of monoculture, and connect dots on how it affects a farmer's life. Our first question is the most obvious one. How are you grappling with conflicting demands of agroecology versus industrial agriculture? You are promoting agroecology, and private companies make money promoting industrial agriculture, selling expensive seeds and chemicals to farmers. Is there a backlash?
Thanks for that question, AJ. In Action Track 3 of the UN Food System and at WWF, we are constantly posed with this question. But before we talk about the specific paradigms, let's talk first about what outcomes we need for food production systems to become nature positive. Today, agriculture accounts for approximately 80% of the deforestation and up to 29% of all greenhouse gas emissions. It uses approximately half of all ice-free land on the planet, which draws 70% of fresh water and is responsible for approximately 70% of the total biodiversity loss on land and 50% on fresh water. And this happens while our oceans are critically overfished, with about 34% of fish stocks at biologically unsustainable levels. So in face of all this, we need to work hard to deliver a different productive model to rebalance the equation we have with the planet. This is the outcome we must achieve. And certainly regenerative agricultural models like agroecology are vehicles to deliver these outcomes that are good for production and are good for the planet as well. Now, unlocking research, technology, and innovation to prioritize agroecological production approaches and regenerative agriculture are key in this transformation. There is substantial evidence that agroecological approaches deliver nature-positive outcomes, but not enough evidence of them being applied at scale to sustain the food requirements of more than 10 billion people expected on the planet by 2050. From a research perspective, we need to assess the synergies and trade-offs between the production, environmental, social, and economic impacts of different approaches, so that potential options can be field tested with farmers in a systematic manner. In my view, there is not a one-size-fits-all solution for the problems we face. Different types of food systems will require different production methods. Lessons learned from agroecology, for example, can be aligned with precision agriculture that uses new technologies like drones for planting seeds or optimizing or completely replacing chemical fertilizer use. Agroecology can also be aligned with automated machinery and smart irrigation systems, all based on advanced data management. While the demands of different food systems are different, there are certainly a set of principles that should be consistent across all nature-positive production practices. They need to refocus food systems towards right-based approaches to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. We need to redesign policy and the enabling conditions for systematic transformation. We need also to redirect financial flows to deliver public goods like the provision of ecosystem services provided by agroecological and regenerative practices, and really take action to resolve systemic challenges by delivering specific solutions. There is a lot that agroecology can offer for nature-positive production. And the high-level panel of experts from the Committee on World Food Security, for example, has done an amazing work on this, which can move us in great strides towards the delivery of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. There is also I highly recommend actually reading the voluntary guidelines on food systems and nutrition, which was recently approved, and also the policy recommendations on agroecological and other innovative approaches for sustainable food systems. These come from the CFS. There is also a very good report that we published at WWF last week called Farming with Biodiversity, where we bring together examples of agroecological models being adopted successfully all over the world. But my final message to this question is that, look, we have 9 years to transition to a new business model. So if you are a farmer or a fisher, this means you have 9 harvests to help deliver the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. This is not much time at all. And this is how long companies will have to change their business model, because they will have to. They will need to seek less rent and help deliver nature positive outcomes.
Thank you. Is there scientific evidence to support that by eliminating monoculture, we can still feed the world?
AJ, let me start with this. Today, 75% of our caloric intake comes from 12 plants and 5 animals. Policies and global supply chains are organized around very few species to ensure scale, right? This is not conducive with good human health or good environmental health. Now, realigning policy and supply chains, say to double the number of plants and animals we rely on for food, is not an easy task, but it will have to be done, because the current system which relies mostly on monocultures is already indicating a movement towards planetary tipping points. There is a strong scientific evidence that adopting nature-positive forms of food production, such as regenerative agriculture, will not sacrifice crop yields. Quite the contrary, these technologies improve soil health, food quality, and yields. Nature-positive forms of food production can also restore biodiversity on farms, reduce greenhouse gas emissions and water use, and also the need for other inputs, such as chemical fertilizers or pesticides. To my knowledge, AJ, what is still unclear is whether this form of agriculture can be scaled globally, how much land it will require, and whether all crops can be grown in a mixed cropping system. Even today, in areas where monocrop exists, however, our first immediate step we must take everywhere is to maximize ecosystem services by protecting and restoring riparian buffers in all agricultural lands. Establish wildlife corridors everywhere. Invest in soil health, because ultimately soil, alongside our oceans, are the basis of life on the planet and the basis of the food system. Moving forward, we must focus also on rights-based approaches to food production. We also need to move away from thinking in terms of either this model or that model, and instead think in terms of both and. All forms of food production that meets the fundamental human right to safe and nutritious and healthy food for all should be considered, as long as they can be done within planetary boundaries.
So the next question comes in. The European Union has proposed a border carbon tax as early as 2023. And predominant measure of growth for agriculture is agriculture GDP or productivity per unit. And agriculture research is too infatuated and focused on industrial agriculture. Considering in this world we value what we measure, there is a need for a new matrix of measurement which factors in environmental and societal costs. Is there a way forward on this?
Yes, let me start first with your question on taxes, like carbon on biodiversity. I agree that this should be implemented, but this may not resolve the problems at the source. Let me qualify this. If this type of tax is not implemented globally by all major importing countries, there will be leakages in the system, which will deem this measure ineffective. It needs to be combined with a payment for performance or some sort of command and control or standards. I have been observing a recent movement that calls for a set of minimum environmental standards for global food trade, similar to the global food safety standards in the Codex Alimentarius. These environmental standards, let's call it Codex Planetarius, this is the term that I have seen emerge. While the Codex Alimentarius aims to protect human health and fair practices in the food trade, it does not address the production of food or its impact on the health of the planet. Hence, the need for a system to monitor the health of renewable environmental resources used to produce globally traded food. Focused on a planetary scale, this Codex Planetarius would establish and require minimum performance levels for countries to enter global markets. And producers in these countries can be incentivized to produce in a nature-positive way. Progress on one issue like carbon or in one region like the EU is great, but we need to apply a consistent system globally if we are to manage our food system sustainably. The three major issues of food insecurity, climate change, and biodiversity loss are interlinked, and there will be synergies and trade-offs in applying solutions. So we must tackle the three issues together. So instead of additional piecemeal trading taxes, as important as they are, or standards, as important as they are, a guiding instrument like a Codex Planetarius could potentially account for all aspects of environmental health when it comes to food trade. And this must then be implemented hand in hand with the Codex Alimentarius. Needless to say that this approach would only go forward if the WTO is on board as well. Now, let me move to your second question about measures, and the performance measures for this. The hidden costs of global food and land use system, the last figure I have in my mind comes from FOLU, the Food and Land Use Coalition, sum up to $12 trillion dollars per year, compared to a market value of the global food system of $10 trillion US dollar per year. So in the food production system today, we know the price of everything, but we don't know the real value of nothing. Deficits arise because many current assessments of agriculture and food systems are partial and fail to incorporate all of the factors. For instance, looking at only factor productivity per hectare and not accounting for the cost of deforestation and conversion of natural systems and the services that they are destroying when ecosystems are converted into agricultural lands, this is not captured. A new matrix for measuring true cost of food already exists. For example, the TEEB Agri-Food Evaluation Framework looks at how natural produced human and social capital deliver environmental, economic, health, and social impacts. We need to apply this understanding when we measure value in the food system.
Subsidies can be a source of distortion and tend to incentivize biodiversity loss in food exporting nations. Therefore, our present system of agriculture subsidy is detrimental for sustainable food systems. And you think there is practically a change possible in the years ahead?
Well, let's start by looking at some numbers here, Jay. I mean, according to the World Bank, only 5% of current direct public support for agriculture explicitly targets conservation and other public goods. There needs to be a major change. Subsidies must be redirected to explicitly support conservation as well as other public goods. Some countries are currently underinvesting or not prioritizing investments in agriculture, and others continue to tax their farmers through policies that tend to depress producer prices, even as they provide input support, often in the form of subsidies, making it very difficult for farmers to adopt new technologies or even invest and reorient their production patterns to become more sustainable. In many parts of the global south, for example, input subsidies, such as for fertilizers, are the principal form of public support. These subsidies can have strong adverse effects on water and soil quality without providing real sustainable support for farm incomes. In the global north, public support is predominantly through market price supports and producer payments. So even in countries where restoring ecosystem services is incentivized, it is often not enough. So better targeting of incentives provided through public support can help meet current challenges and future-proof food systems, recognizing and empowering food producers to be positive agents of change.
So, Joao, we'll come to the last question, and which is something which is very close to my heart. We find that amongst the millions of people who are suffering from chronic hunger are also farmers who are actually tasked to produce the food and feed the world. And we are also seeing lately that farmers are becoming increasingly more dependent on food value chains for nutrition rather than growing their own basic requirements. Can home gardens and backyard poultry be the answer? As per FAO, home gardening and production for home consumption are vastly undocumented, so the impact is largely unknown. Why is there no focus on research, and why is there opposition to low-cost ideas which have potential to change lives?
AJ, let me first say that I'm a big believer in short supply chains, like home gardens and so on. So there is there is absolutely a place for shorter supply chains, local closed loop food systems, and traditional approaches, where this is most relevant and most effective way of conserving nature and feeding all people a healthy and nutritious diet. In my view, local supply chains is also positive because it helps to stabilize the supply of food in the short run when global supply chains suffer unexpected disruptions, like we have seen last year with the closing of ports due to COVID restrictions. But local supply chains cannot replace global supply chains. They need to coexist. In some places, local supply chains won't work, in my view, because of space, weather, or climate, or suitability of the soils to produce the variety of foods that people need for their nutrition. Social and economic issues may also determine the type of production systems adopted. For instance, if it's a small-scale subsistence farm versus a large commercial farm. What is important is that in any scenario, we are adopting nature-positive production practices to achieve the fundamental human right to healthy and nutritious food. Without nature-positive production, the long-term ability of any community to feed itself will decline. Nature-positive production systems protect nature, they rely on regenerative practices, they enhance the richness and abundance of biodiversity in land and water, and rehabilitate the functions of degraded natural systems. So there is indeed immense need to understand what local supply chains can do. And honestly, I do not know why so little research funds are dedicated to exploring this more in depth. At the Food Systems Summit, we could definitely bring that gap forward and begin to work with organizations to unpack that, to reveal why this lock-in exists and how we can try to work to resolve it.
Thank you, Joao, for this insightful interview on behalf of farmers and fishers all over the world. I wish to thank you for all the good work you're doing. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you.
Delighted to be here, Jay. Thank you. Count on us.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.